You made a decision today, or at least you tried to. Maybe it was something simple, whether to send that email, whether to take that opportunity, whether to say yes or no to something that actually mattered to you. And somewhere between thinking about it and actually doing something, your brain just stalled. You kept circling the same thoughts. You ran through every possible outcome. You imagined what could go wrong, then imagined what could go wrong with that. And before long, the decision felt heavier than it had any right to be. So you waited. You told yourself you needed more time, more information, more certainty. And the moment passed, or the anxiety stayed, or both. This is not a personal failure. This is not a character flaw. What happened inside your mind in that moment has a name, a mechanism, and a very specific reason it keeps repeating. And understanding it, really understanding it at the level of how your brain actually works, is the only way to stop it from quietly running your life without your permission. Overthinking is one of the most misunderstood mental patterns in modern life. Most people treat it like a bad habit you can just interrupt, a discipline problem you can fix with a timer or a journal prompt. But the reality is far more layered than that. Overthinking is not random. It is not simply thinking too much. It is a specific cognitive response that emerges from a brain that has learned, through repeated experience, that uncertainty is dangerous. And once that learning gets wired in deeply enough, it starts hijacking the very systems your brain uses to make decisions, quietly, automatically, and almost entirely outside your conscious awareness. To understand why this happens, you first need to understand how your brain handles decisions in general. Decision-making is not a single process. Your brain does not have one unified system that evaluates options and selects the best one. Instead, it operates through two competing systems that neuroscientists loosely describe as fast thinking and slow thinking. The fast system is automatic, emotional, and largely unconscious. It operates through pattern recognition. It reads a situation, matches it to past experience, and generates an immediate response. The slow system is deliberate, logical, and effortful. It evaluates information consciously, weighs outcomes, and reasons through complexity. Both systems are necessary. The problem with overthinking is that it creates a dysfunctional loop between these two systems, where neither one can complete its job properly. Here's what that loop looks like in real time. A decision needs to be made. The fast system generates an initial response, a gut feeling, an impulse, a leaning in one direction. But for an overthinker, the slow system immediately overrides it. It questions the gut feeling, demands justification, introduces doubt. This is not inherently a bad thing. That reflective capacity is actually one of the most valuable cognitive tools humans have. The problem is what happens next. Instead of arriving at a clearer answer, the slow system generates more variables, more potential outcomes, more what-if scenarios. And as those scenarios multiply, they trigger the emotional centers of the brain, specifically the amygdala, which reads the growing complexity as a form of threat. The amygdala then floods the system with a low-grade anxiety signal, which makes the slow system work even harder to resolve the uncertainty, which generates even more scenarios, which creates even more anxiety. The loop tightens. The decision becomes impossible, and the brain eventually does what it always does when a task feels unresolvable. It avoids it entirely. This avoidance is not laziness. It is a stress response. When the brain cannot compute a path forward that feels safe, the default is to withdraw from the decision entirely. This is why overthinking so frequently produces inaction. It is not that the person does not want to decide. It is that the neural circuitry responsible for executive function, the prefrontal cortex, has been effectively paralyzed by competing signals. Too much information, too much emotional noise, too much simulated risk. The decision-making architecture breaks down not from lack of effort, but from an overload of effort applied in the wrong direction. What makes this particularly difficult to recognize is that overthinking feels productive. From the inside, running through every possible scenario feels like due diligence. It feels responsible, careful, thorough. The brain even generates a mild sense of cognitive engagement during the process, which can mimic the feeling of making progress. But there is a critical difference between genuine analysis and recursive rumination. Genuine analysis moves toward a conclusion. Rumination moves in circles. The test is simple. After 15 minutes of thinking about a decision, are you closer to an answer? Or are you just more aware of how many ways things could go wrong? The deeper mechanism underneath this pattern has a lot to do with how the brain relates to uncertainty at a neurological level. The human brain is a prediction machine. Its primary function from an evolutionary standpoint is not to think deeply or make optimal choices. It is to predict what happens next and minimize surprise. Uncertainty, by definition, is the absence of a reliable prediction. And to the brain, unpredictable situations historically represented danger. The neural architecture that evolved to protect humans from physical threats in unpredictable environments is the same architecture that now responds to professional uncertainty, social risk, and personal decisions. When you cannot predict the outcome of a decision, your brain registers that uncertainty in the same region that processes physical fear. This is not metaphorical. The neurological response is genuinely overlapping. So overthinking, in this context, is the brain's attempt to manufacture certainty before it acts. If you can think through every possible outcome, the brain reasons, you will not be surprised. You will not be hurt. You will not fail in a way you did not anticipate. The strategy is understandable. But it does not work, because real certainty is never available before a decision, only after it. And the more the brain tries to simulate certainty by thinking harder, the more variables it discovers, which makes the uncertainty feel larger, which intensifies the entire loop. There is another layer worth examining here, and it involves how modern life actively amplifies this tendency. The human brain was never designed to process the volume of information it encounters in a typical day in contemporary life. Between the constant influx of news, social media, notifications, competing narratives, and the unrelenting pressure to optimize every aspect of existence, the prefrontal cortex is in a near-constant state of high-demand cognitive load. When a brain is already running at full capacity, decision-making becomes significantly harder. The mental resources required for clear, grounded evaluation are simply not available. And when those resources are depleted, the brain defaults to anxiety-driven processing, which is precisely the kind of processing that fuels overthinking. This is not about willpower. Cognitive depletion is a measurable biological state. Research in behavioral psychology consistently shows that decision quality degrades as mental fatigue increases. The more decisions a person has already made in a given day, including micro decisions like what to scroll past, what to reply to, what to ignore, the less reliable their decision-making becomes by evening. And in a world designed around constant stimulation and perpetual input, most people are running on a depleted cognitive baseline before they ever get to the decisions that actually matter. This creates a situation where overthinking is not a personality trait. It is often a symptom of a system that has been pushed beyond its functional capacity. Identity also plays a significant role in maintaining the overthinking pattern, and this part rarely gets examined. For many people, thoroughness and analysis have become part of how they define themselves. Being someone who thinks carefully feels like a virtue. It feels like intelligence, and at a certain level, it is. But when that identity becomes overweighted, when the internal narrative becomes, I only make good decisions when I've thought through everything completely, it creates a standard that is neurologically impossible to meet. No amount of thinking will ever produce the certainty the brain is searching for. But because the identity is attached to the process, abandoning that process feels like abandoning the self. So the loop continues, reinforced not just by anxiety, but by self-concept. Shifting out of this pattern requires more than technique. It requires a reframing of what decision-making actually is. A decision is not the discovery of the objectively correct answer. It is the selection of the best available option given current information, with the understanding that course correction is always possible afterward. The brain that cannot tolerate this definition, that insists a decision is only valid if it is certain and irreversible in its correctness, will always default to analysis paralysis, because no decision will ever meet that standard. One of the most effective things a person can do is learn to work with the fast system rather than constantly overriding it. Gut feelings are not irrational noise. They are compressed pattern recognition, the accumulated output of everything the brain has learned through prior experience processed in milliseconds. They are imperfect, and they carry biases, but they are also frequently correct in ways that extended deliberation is not. The habit of immediately delegitimizing an intuitive response in favor of exhaustive analysis often does not improve the quality of decisions. It frequently just delays them while increasing anxiety and reducing confidence in the outcome. This does not mean abandoning reflection entirely. It means calibrating the depth of reflection to the actual stakes involved. A low-stakes, reversible decision deserves a short, limited deliberation window. A high-stakes, complex decision deserves more careful examination, but with a defined endpoint, not an infinite loop. Structuring decision-making with intentional constraints, giving yourself a specific amount of time, defining the criteria in advance, committing to act when that window closes, is not rushing or cutting corners. It is teaching the brain that uncertainty does not require resolution before action is possible. The relationship between overthinking and identity ultimately comes down to a belief about control. Overthinkers tend to operate under the implicit assumption that if they think hard enough, they can control outcomes. That mental preparation is a form of protection. But the most psychologically stable decision makers are not the ones who think the most. They are the ones who have developed a tolerance for uncertainty, who understand that outcomes are never fully controllable, and who have learned to trust the process of deciding and adjusting, rather than demanding perfect clarity before they move. That tolerance is not natural for everyone, but it is learnable. It develops gradually, through low-stakes decisions made faster than comfortable, through noticing that the feared outcomes rarely materialize at the intensity the brain predicted, through accumulating evidence that action followed by adjustment is almost always more effective than extended inaction followed by regret. The brain changes in response to behavior. That is not a motivational statement. It is a description of neuroplasticity. Every time a person makes a decision without waiting for complete certainty, and then observes that the outcome was manageable, the neural circuitry associated with tolerance for uncertainty gets slightly reinforced. Every time a person sits with discomfort, rather than spiraling into further analysis, the amygdala's threat response to that discomfort gets slightly recalibrated. This is a slow process, but it is a real one. The patterns that currently feel automatic were also learned through repetition, through reinforcement, through a nervous system that was doing its best to protect you at a time when it didn't have better options. Understanding the mechanism behind overthinking does not make decisions easier overnight, but it does change what the experience means. When you notice the loop starting, when you feel the pull toward one more consideration, one more scenario, one more round of imagined consequences, you are not failing. You are observing a brain that is doing exactly what it was trained to do. The question is simply whether that training still serves you, or whether it is time to teach it something more accurate about how the world actually works and how capable you already are of navigating it.